So I always like to say, you know, I've got 30 years of corporate experience, but at the age of about 46, 47, I decided to make my own career pivot, and that's when I launched. I broke away from corporate America and started my own consulting practice. And originally from New Jersey, so I'm always looking to get back to New Jersey when I can. So this is always an opportunity to talk to people that where I grew up. So let's get right into it. So, you know, I always like to start with a framework so everything's put in context. And I'm going to talk about some tougher interview questions this morning, but here's a little bit of a framing. You know, one is that, you know, there's interview basics, and I'm going to cover those basics here in a minute. And then there's behavioral competency-based interviewing, and then there's the whole video interviewing, solo interviewing, which you know continues on. That's where you're talking to a computer, and there's no live person, right? Panel interviews, and then practicing with hard critique by somebody. So that's kind of like a little bit of a framing. So let's just start with interview basics first. And you know, if I was to sit down with a client, sit down with you, and we're going to go through a really extensive coaching session, I'm going to cover these areas at length. The first one is tell me about yourself. Now, even though I say it's under interview basics, I will tell you that that's a topic that I speak on for an hour all by itself. That's how important it is. And I will be speaking about that topic tomorrow morning in a discussion with Careers in Transition in Short Hills, New Jersey. So I don't want to tell you that it's a basic question, but yet the answer, how you answer, is so important. You know, and then the other things that I want people to focus on is researching a firm, know something about it. And I can just certainly tell you cases where something as simple as that have lost job opportunities, because I can remember several clients were asked at the beginning of the interview, "Oh, so you must use our product in your home every day." And I always remember, you know, my client said, "What product?" And quite honestly, the interview was over at that point. They didn't do their research, right? Knowing your interviewers, there's a lot of ways to do this. That's so important. Current events, a lot of mistakes are made by not Googling the company day before, 2 days before, 3 days before an interview, especially for those interviews that are set up 3 weeks from now. And then you go to the interview and someone's looking at you and they say, "Well, you must have heard." And again, another not such a good thing if they come back and they say, you know, "Heard what?" And I've had cases where, again, it didn't go well. And then, of course, you know, there's a STAR technique. I call it the CAR technique, but it's contact, actions, results tied to your accomplishments. Getting good at saying that. Always being ready for, hey, what are your top 3 strengths? Tell me about a big mistake. Your mannerisms and your nonverbals are key. When I say key, I mean really key. One study had indicated that your mannerisms and your nonverbals have a 50% impact in terms of establishing a relationship with someone for the very first time. And it's even more so true during an interview when someone's meeting you. That's everything from eye contact to how you smile, to your hand gestures, how you sit. It's a lot of things. Closing strong. Again, a weak close on an interview is horrible. There's lots of ways you can do things, but one of the things you have to do is close strong. Face-to-face, if you have that face-to-face interview, again, there's a whole list of things, especially if we start slowly moving back to those face-to-face interviews, and you're walking through the building and meeting people. There's a certain protocol that you need to really go through. You know, questions to ask. I just did a Clubhouse session on that topic this past Tuesday, and it was one of my highest attended forums. And I even had one client listen to that Clubhouse talk and sent me a note yesterday saying, Ed, I moved to the next round because of that Clubhouse talk. That's how important the quality of the questions are and how you have to really think it through well. But I've also had clients in my tenure that did not get the job, and they came back to me and said, well, why? And they said, well, they did not ask good questions. So asking good questions becomes pretty darn important. Shifting an interview to conversational talk and knowing how to do that is just so important. I remember I was on a call, it was about a year ago, and it was the person that leads the recruiting effort for Amazon for, I would say, more their mid to senior level positions. And he said the number one thing they look for, the number one thing in this exchange of an interview is, can we make it conversational? And once it kind of shifts to conversational, that's where the plus sign comes in and people are starting to feel good about the candidate. When it's not conversational, they're not as pleased. There's always the question of fit. Why are you a fit? Being ready to answer that question and do it well. What's your leadership style? Again, that's a basic one, but you got to know your leadership style. Again, another basic, hey, why did you move from this company to this company? How to say that and what to say and what not to say. And then lastly, being a timekeeper. I had a client this week interviewing, and I said, how long is the interview? Well, it's not sure. I think it's 30 minutes. Well, my advice to people is ask the question right out of the gate, because there's a big difference when an interview is 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, but never go into an interview at the onset not knowing how long it's going to be. Because if you know how long an interview is going to be, then you also know how to gauge your answers, right? So, these are the basics. I wanted to take just a few minutes to frame it because we're going to go into tough questions, but it's hard to go into tough questions if you don't have these things down fairly well. So, David, any questions around this before I move on?
No questions posted just yet. Remember, folks, you can post your questions in chat and we'll address them as they come up.
Okay, great. So here's the next one. This is, again, goes back to foundational. Now, we write, I and my team, we've written 1,000 resumes, and I've published a book, and I have very strong feelings about how resumes should be written. And my fundamental belief is that we write resumes for the hidden job market, not for the applicant tracking systems, but for the hidden job market. And we also write a resume so it's a script for an interview. And if you do the resume well, and that's a script for the interview, a lot of what you have, especially on the first page of a resume, get good at talking about during an interview, right? So sometimes I'll look at resumes. I can't say sometimes. A lot of times we'll look at resumes and it's a bunch of job description information, and it's a failing proposition when you go in to talk to somebody about your job description, because everybody has one, right? But if you write it in a way where it's accomplishment driven, where it's value driven, where you're going to talk about the things where you've had the most impact, where you've demonstrated your leadership, your core competencies, and you've been able to quantify them, and that's really well written on a resume, you have such a much better opportunity to prepare and execute an interview. And again, these are basics, right? Interview basics, having a strong resume. Now, if you have all this down well, then you go to an interview, then interview questions might get tougher, right? So now we're going to kind of jump into some of the tougher questions. And because we've helped so many people over the years, just about every one of these comes from a lot of blood and guts and scars of experience with real life examples behind them. So let's start with the first one. This one is one of the simplest questions, and it's one of the hardest ones people have try to answer. And you go to an interview, and it could be a panel interview, it could be a one-on-one interview, and this has happened to dozens of my clients over the years, where you think it's going to be this back and forth, you're going to have this really neat discussion, and the person just looks at you and says, you know, this interview is going to be a little different. I have your resume, but you know what? Hey, this is what I want you to do. We have about 45 minutes, and there's only 2 questions I'm going to ask you. Why you? Why us? And then, you know, for the remaining time, we'll talk about some other things. Go. You can start now. And I will tell you, for most people, it's very unsettling if someone was to approach you with that kind of question, because most people aren't ready for it. And B, here's what typically happens. Every time I've coached the person around this, or this type of thing has happened, and I haven't coached them, they come to me and they say, hey, Ed, I need some help here. You have to avoid that machine gun answer where, well, let me tell you, boom, 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 boom. Next thing you know, it's rapid fire of all the things that you've done and all the things, you know, and why you're a good fit. And what happens is that 6 minutes later, you're completely done with everything you had to say. And there's a very awkward silence in the room at that point. Hiring manager gave you 45 minutes. You're done in 6 minutes. So if you ever get caught with this question, you have to mentally prepare for it in a way that segments it out. Well, if I've asked this question over 30 minutes, I'm going to segment it out in maybe 5 buckets, 4 buckets. And in each of those buckets, I'm going to give some specific examples. And it's okay to talk about, well, hey, here, you know, here's some research I've done about you. See, the why you question, you could do that 2-3 minutes. Why, I mean, the why us question you could do in 2 or 3 minutes. The why you is much longer, right? That's where you want to break it out. That's where you want to then tell somebody, you know, here are the 5 reasons why I believe this could be a really good fit. And you're summarizing it. And you got to be careful with that, with long run-on sentences. Summarize it. Hey, here are 4 reasons. Let me give you the first one. And then I give you a couple of examples. And then, you know, you have to go a little bit deep. So for each one of those, if you spent 10 minutes, 7 minutes on each, right, you start to build a case for yourself in that kind of question, and you could summarize at the end. So let me summarize. Here are the 4 key reasons why I believe I'm a fit. Hopefully I've given you some really good examples here. And then you could, you know, then turn it back to them. I had a client fairly recently go to an interview, and what happened was it was a panel interview. Sent them down. There were 6 people, and this was a face-to-face. This wasn't Zoom. This was a face-to-face. Set them down, and first thing they said to my client was, well, this will be a little different. Your first 30 minutes of this discussion with this panel will be why you. Go. And guess what? My client had prepared, laid it out, segmented it out. Then they went on to have other discussions in the interview. When it was done, the hiring manager talked to my client afterwards, saying that was one of the best responses we had ever seen, because most people aren't prepared for that type of question. He ended up getting the job offer, right? So being prepared, again, is better than not being prepared. And look, in the end, like all these questions, this may never be asked of you, but it might be asked of you, right? So we always expect the easy questions, the back and forth. But this question has happened many times. David, any questions? Make sense?
Yep, no questions have come in. Again, folks, you can post those in chat if you'd like.
Okay, great. So let's go to the next one. So next one, a little bit tougher question. Can you tell me about a time you lifted someone up? And there's a case where, there's a little different twist to the question. And what they're trying to get at is, how do you help people without being asked to help people? And I think what this question tries to get at is, what's your heart for people? What's your heart for teaming beyond the job description of what you're required to do? When do you lift people up when your boss doesn't tell you to lift people up? You have a great opportunity to explain why you do it, who you are. But if you're not ready for the question, it's kind of like, whoa, what's this about? And then you have to sit and think about it. Well, when have I really got out of my way to lift somebody up? Yeah, you could help people at work, right? But I'm talking about lifting somebody up who really need help. Maybe they're having a bad day. Maybe they're going down a place and they made a huge mistake. This is one of those questions where they're trying to get at your heart, at how you really engage people, and having a good answer for that, I think, is always a really positive one. But be ready for it, and have a couple of examples. And everything I talk about this morning, I could give you a fundamental principle that I really believe in and I teach. Always have two examples, not just one. And I'll share a story later. That happened with some executives at a large insurance company. So here's one. This is a really interesting one. We've had clients interview, and sometimes this happens with HR more than it will happen with a hiring manager, but occasionally. So you're wrapping up, an interview. And the hiring manager looks at you and says, look, we've talked about a lot of things. I've taken some notes, but look, at the top of your resume, I'm going to write one word that best describes you. What would that word be? It's always, then they put you on the spot, right? You might want to tie that one word to your greatest personality trait. You may want to avoid stating a value, like I have high integrity. I work hard, right? But something that's unique that might really describe you best. And if you've described yourself a certain way throughout an interview, whether it's 20 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour, you might want to circle back to that one word that you kept on reinforcing on the interview that they can write right at the top of that resume. So that's something that always be thinking about. What's that one word? So here's one that's a little bit different. What's one mistake that's cost you the most? See, a lot of people will ask the question, hey, tell me about a mistake that you may have made. But this one gets at it differently. This is a big mistake that costs you the most. Now, what they're not looking for a snowball answer, right? This is one where you may have been bloodied, you may have some scars. They're looking for, how genuine are you? Or are you going to give me a flip answer like, I worked too hard on my vacation, and my spouse got mad at me, right? I'm talking about something that you really learned. Tomorrow, when I talk about tell me about yourself, I'll be sharing one of my big scars in my career where I learned the most. And I've got plenty of scars and plenty of mistakes that I could share. But I like to share, I always have one or two lined up. I encourage that, you have one or two lined up where it really talks about what you learned and what you learned from it that made you a better person going forward, right? So the goal of this question is always, right, not just to hear a mistake, but to hear, are you being honest about a big mistake? And what did you learn from it? And how did you get better as a result, right? That's what they're trying to get at when they ask this question in general. But this question is a little bit different. This is something that cost you the most. And one of my many mistakes I've made is that I went into a startup company that was well funded in the tens of millions of dollars. But the problem is I've never worked in a startup company before. And what I did is I started bringing, I brought big think into a smaller startup, big company think into a smaller startup. And wow, did I get beaten up pretty bad. And what lessons did I learn? I could write a book on it, in fact. So that's one.
Oh, excuse me, Ed, there is a question.
Yep.
So this is from Garrett. Can you give an example of a good one word?
So here's one. One would be innovative. And a lot of times that's truly, one of the big words that come out, hey, I'm innovative. I'm always going to try to create something better. And that's a part of who I am. Write it down. That could be one, that could be an example. You might say, I'm a collaborator. I collaborate with people. I've been doing it for a long time. And if I come to work for you, I'm going to collaborate. My thing is, on this one word, here's the thing. Always pick a word that tries to keep it as close to who you really are, as authentic as possible. Because if they write a word down such as collaborative, and you are truly collaborative, I would want them to hire you because they need somebody who's collaborative. I would not want them to hire you if they don't need someone who is collaborative. So please understand, I'm probably the type of coach I'm going to coach you to be authentic, but don't want to coach you to be for the words that they want to hear. So it's a great opportunity when you're asked that question. So here's number 5. This happened to several clients over the years, which has been pretty interesting. Hey, and if you won the lottery, what would you do? Then it's like, wow, where did this come from? So here it is, and these questions tend to be asked, this kind of question tends to be asked to more senior people. So looking for an honest answer. Would you stay? Would you go? Who would you help? I mean, there's all kinds of things built into this. And one of my clients was asked this question in the final interview. It was, everything got a green light. He was a CEO, and everything was boiled down to a question with the chairman of the board of a very well-known company. And the chairman of the board sat down, they had a cup of coffee, they were just chatting for a little bit, and he said, hey, look, if you won the lottery, what would you do? And it just happened, right, that my client had gone home and talked to his wife about this probably a month earlier, And they actually talked about, well, hey, what would happen? And he gave an honest answer, and it went well, and he ended up getting the job offer, right? This is one of these questions too. And I worked in Arizona for a few years and hired a lot of people, and Arizona state law is pretty strict, and I'm sure it is in each state. It's a little bit different, but I could just tell you this is kind of like an illegal question to ask if you get technical about it, right? But and then you always have a choice. Well, hey, I'm not sure how I could answer that, right? You could always try to back out of the answer when it's an illegal question or it's a question that really makes you uncomfortable, because that type of question has nothing to do with the minimum requirements of the job, right? Now, they're trying to get at your heart. They're trying to get at longevity. They're trying to get at, who you are beyond the job description again. But you might want to have an answer for it in case it was ever posed to you. So here's one that very fundamental. Hiring managers looking at you, you're having this discussion, and they say, hey, I looked at your LinkedIn profile, and you're telling me you're this incredible person. You've accomplished all these things, and you're so good at everything. Why has no one ever recommended you on LinkedIn? Or if you have one recommendation, how come it's from, someone, who's a friend that you've never worked with? I don't see any recommendations from where you worked from anybody. And my argument in this one is don't ever put yourself in that situation. Please, I beg you. There's no excuse for it. If you're a rock star, then there should be a lot of people that are out there that are willing to stick their neck out publicly for you. That's the power of a LinkedIn recommendation. And if you're that good, right, somebody out there must love you to be able to put something on LinkedIn. And then the question is, this is something else that happens. Hey, I know you've led people, and you're telling me you lead high-performing teams and that you have, all these incredible gifts. And yeah, I looked at your LinkedIn page and you never recommended one person. Why is that? So if you lead people, make sure you've given a recommendation. If you're as good as you say you are, make sure you have several on LinkedIn. I talked to a person earlier this week, and yeah, they had 2 LinkedIn recommendations. They were from 2008. Unemployed, looking for a job. I said, you worked at 2 companies and you had some really nice runs since 2008. You don't have one LinkedIn recommendation since then? Question mark. Because what's going to happen if you're asked the question during an interview, that question is it's kind of like an indirect reference question, right? Have an answer for it. And by the way, if you say, well, hey, I don't use LinkedIn. I'm not on LinkedIn that much. Yeah, I never had much use to for LinkedIn. I could just tell you that's a rapidly downward spiral that you'll bring yourself to. And I don't care what level you're at, how senior you are. Being current in social media, especially for those clients I work with, 55, 60, 65, 70, literally being sharp in social media is everything. But certainly the older you are, you should have more recommendations on LinkedIn, not less. Okay. So here's one, again, simple question. Hey, what are your top 2 strengths of your personality? And the reason I put this in here is because if I talk to 20 people, and I've got stats on this, if I talk to 20 people, I would say 17. 17 may not get this answer right. Or 17 people will look at me and say, I'm not sure. And the last thing I want you to do is go to an interview, be asked this question and not be able to look right at them and say, you know, my number one trait of my personality is I'm highly innovative. That's who I am. That's my greatest strength. That's why I'm an engineer, by the way. That's why I'm a graphic designer. It's why I do what I do. That's my greatest strength. My second greatest strength is, you know, I love attention to detail. I love doing things well, thinking it through, measuring 3 times and cutting once. That's who I am. If you don't know the top 2 strengths of your personality, take an assessment. Call me up. I have a very inexpensive assessment to do. Take a free one. But my point being is take one where you can really, really hone in on that personality type and answer the question. So this is another question where you have a great opportunity in an interview to be incredibly authentic. Because I'm saying take a personality assessment so you know who you are, and then in an interview, give them that authentic answer. Because I'm going to go back to, if your number one personality strength is innovative, wow, you want to tell them that because the job might require a high degree of innovation, but the job also may have almost no innovation. And again, you're letting them know who you really are, because the thing that I hate the most, one of the things I hate the most is when people get hired and then they call me up a year later and this is not working out and this is not the job I thought it was going to be. And I said, well, why? Because Ed, you know, I'm so innovative and I went to this job and there's no innovation here. I said, well, how come, you know, they didn't know that when you interviewed, right? You want people to hire you to bring out the best in you, not the weakest part of you. And the other mistake that's made when this question's asked is that people will tend to bring up a value. People will tend to say, well, I have high integrity. And I would argue that's not a personality trait. It's a value. Hey, Ed, I work really hard. I want to pick something that's really going to differentiate you because it's a true personality trait. And again, take an assessment if you're not sure. David, any questions before I go on?
Yeah, there are 2, one on this slide and one on the prior. So since we're on this slide, Garrett is asking, as an assessment, something like Myers-Briggs?
You could use Myers-Briggs, but I would just be careful that it doesn't cross into a whole set of values. So yeah, you can use Myers-Briggs. But there are assessments out there. There are assessments out there for $19 that are just spot on and easy. Excuse me. But I mean, the one we use is 16 questions, and it's statistically valid. And it's been every single client that we have, that we work with, will do this assessment, and it's crazy how accurate it is. And you're done in 10 minutes. And it's very inexpensive. Myers-Briggs is a very long exercise, so there's many other in-depth, and Myers-Briggs is intended to cover other things. This is just a really simple focus on who you are from a personality standpoint. The other reason people are asking this question is because good hiring managers are trying to figure out how your personality will fit in with the rest of the team, right? So that's one of the other kind of ways people are trying to understand who you are.
If I recall your assessment, it's proprietary, right?
Yeah, we use a tool called Personality ID. So it's a proprietary DISC tool. A lot of money was spent on it, and intended to focus on personality types as it relates with a secondary or primary focus on how those personalities will interrelate with other people on teams. 17 shared profile types were created, and it really was created in a way to get people to team better. But the starting point is an individual's personality type. And then what happens is you take two people, you merge them together, they have one personality type. You take a 10-person team, you merge it together, that team has a personality type. So again, it's called DISC Personality ID. Sometimes it's known as PID, and that's the tool that we use.
Okay, and there's another question a little bit earlier. It's from Pasquale. And Pasquale, I may ask you to unmute because I don't understand what you wrote. It's how likely if interviewer is not active on LinkedIn. So maybe
Yeah,
it's how likely.
it's in reference to the tough question 6 about they're asking you for the number of recommendations you have or why your recommendations are so old. What if the person you're interviewing with just isn't active on LinkedIn? I've got an interview coming up, and the 2 people I'm interviewing with sparse LinkedIn, no activity, very little activity for both of them. That's the question.
So here's the answer. The answer is, the good news is that the person's interviewing has no LinkedIn presence or doesn't use it. The chance of this question coming up is probably slim to none.
Okay.
That's the answer. This question is really geared towards, you go and you interview with somebody and they have, 500 plus connections on LinkedIn. You look and you see they have some recommendations. They've given some recommendations. They're kind of right where they need to be. Those are the ones that I worry about who are going to ask you that question. But the ones who have no LinkedIn presence, chances are they don't even know the importance of LinkedIn as a hiring manager. And that happens every once in a while, and especially as you kind of go down. I mean, it happens everywhere, quite honestly, today, especially with leaders who are feeling they don't need it because they've never been in job transition. But then, unfortunately, for many of those same leaders, if they find themselves unemployed, talking to me or some of the coaches on this call, they find out how badly they should have had it. So, great question, though.
Thanks.
There's another question about assessments. Kathy was wondering about the Clifton Strengths Assessment. How useful is that assessment?
I'd have to go back and look at Clifton Strengths, but I could tell you I know of, and I've used most of the 20 competing assessment tools out there. Every one of them has some value, for a different audience. Clifton Strengths, I'd have to go back and look at it again, but I think if it hits on and covers a person, 1 or 2 areas that calls out those top 2 strengths tied to your personality, then I think it could be a good indicator, a good tool to use.
And then Ruth is asking, can you just tell us again the name of the assessment you use?
It's called DISC Personality ID.
DISC?
Yep, DISC Personality ID.
Okay, yeah, I'm typing that now in chat for everybody.
Okay.
And that's it right now.
Okay. So here's number 8. So a lot's happened in the United States prior to COVID, and then COVID hits. But there's certainly, this question is coming up more and more during an interview, and I ask everyone to be prepared for it. And it's an oldie question, but it's a newer question. And if you take a look at the number of people that have been hired in the last 3 or 4 years, you've seen a huge uptick and people being hired to lead diversity inclusion at mid to senior level companies. This is a question where if they look at you, especially if you're in a leadership role, but I see these questions come at people who are not even in a leadership role. Share a few examples of how you have valued diversity, supported inclusion, and showed no bias in your career. Now, a lot of times when you're a hiring manager, I mean, when you're a leader and you've hired people, you can kind of weave in, hey, look, I have a pretty diverse team, and that's an answer. But another answer would be, yep, I lead a team of 400 people, and I made sure that when we go off and we have an opening, that we bring in some diverse populations, and I set that as a goal, so that we're all not, looking and the same in this team. The more diversity, the better. Here's what I've done. That's a better answer. Another answer is that, hey, I went off and, hey, I have sponsored, I've supported, I talked at any one of the diverse groups that are out there, or you've done nothing, right? My only point is, make sure when this question's asked, give real examples and have a couple lined up that have a little bit of teeth behind them. Companies either, they either walk the talk and they start, and this particular question is asked more and more simply because of what's happened in the last 3 or 4 years. But, if you're walking the talk, you're going to ensure that your company, the people that are doing the interviewing, HR is making sure that this question is built into the series of questions you're asking candidates, just to make sure that people even acknowledge that this is part of their responsibility, let alone part of what they've been doing in the past, part of what they, can help bring and add to if they get hired into this company, right? So again, seems like a simple question. You'd be amazed how many people that I've coached that can't give the answer though.
Oh, excuse me, Ed, a couple of questions came in.
Okay.
One is, it's actually a comment from Jerry. He gave the website to discprofiles.com. That's not the same disc assessment that you use, is it?
No, I'll do is, when I'm done, I'll type in I'll get the assessment and I'll put it in the chat for us.
Yeah, so for those of you who've heard of the DISC assessment, that's more of a personality profile, a little bit different than what Ed's talking about. So glad we had that clarity. There is a question from, let me just scroll down, to Michelle. Can a person use flexibility as a strength? Flexibility in the sense that you are an expert at working with others to collaborate using their strengths, schedule, and constraints to quote unquote make it work. This is actually the word that my boss used to praise me.
Yeah, I think I don't have a problem with somebody using that word. That there's flexibility is one of the biggest things that you bring to the table. And we'll hit on this again in a short while here, but I don't have an issue with that at all.
Okay, terrific. And let's see, there's a question from Charlie. One caution about LinkedIn. I have seen companies where everybody's profile is emptied out. I also know a few individuals who hollowed out their profiles but are LinkedIn smart. So it's more of an observation, I guess, than a question, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So I agree with you. It really depends on the company, what they're doing, what their strategy is. Some companies, are try to be on top of it. Some don't. I know some people where I know one company in Pennsylvania where they said, no, you're not allowed to give anybody a recommendation. That was like the company stance. And I'm not sure, they can stop people from doing it legally, but that was the company stance. And other companies, they bring somebody like me in to lead a session to make sure all employees at the company have a LinkedIn profile. Because as much as we think having a great LinkedIn profile helps us in job transition and move our careers forward, which is absolutely true, having a great LinkedIn profile as an employee also promotes the company. So there's other arguments that can be made. Heck, if you're interviewing for a job for two different companies and they're interviewing you and you're looking at two potential bosses, one boss, has a LinkedIn profile with 5 recommendations for people that have worked for him or her. The other person has a sketchy skeleton LinkedIn profile with no recommendations, and you have no other data. Who might you lean towards, right, in a dogfight? So companies who think LinkedIn is just this poor thing, I would argue that you should be using it as a vehicle to interview them in terms of the quality of leader that is hiring you. Just my perspective on it. But it's a great observation that all kinds of things are going on.
Thank you.
Okay, here's another one. This is an oldie, but it's always been a tough one. And I had an example yesterday with an early stage person. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? So the interview is going on really well. They like you, everything's going on, and then they throw out, where do you see yourself in 5 years? And next thing you know, well, we're looking to move to Charlotte, in a couple of years. Oh, crash land if the job is in Parsippany, New Jersey. And they really want you in Parsippany, New Jersey, right? The other thing is that, look, if you're going to be leaving because, hey, you know what, I think I'm going to start my own business. Actually, I have 2 examples that came up recently. One was a person actually said to someone, I'm going to start my own business in about 5 years. Guess what? They didn't get the job. Wasn't my client, trust me. But they're also trying to understand, do you want to are you leaning towards a solo track or a leadership track, right? If you interviewed for a financial advisory role, as an example, with a firm, one of the questions, hey, where do you see yourself in 5 years? This is a great question because on the advisory front, there's only 2 tracks. There's a partnership track, and then there's a solo track, right? And sometimes the leaders of the franchise organizations want to know that. Had another person say, hey, they're interviewing for a role in a healthcare concern, and they had asked me the question, Ed, what should I say if I'm, and he said to me, well, I'm going to tell him I want to, go focus on biology and go after that career in about 5 years. And I said, well, you may not want to say that on the interview on Monday. Be careful. All right, here's one that I want you to be ready for. So what professional organizations are you part of to keep your saw sharp? And by the way, if you're in supply chain, what's the biggest issue in supply chain right now? And you were, a financial advisor. If you were an IT auditor, if you were a CPA, if you're asked that question, I don't care what your profession, and I'm not a big fan of when they come at you and they ask you this question. They say, well, I'm not part of any professional organization. Oh yeah, back in 1976, I was a member of X, right? That's a non-starter too. So, tying it to a professional organization could be a really important thing. That answer to some type of organization. But tie it back to your resume. If you don't have anything on your resume, that's a different problem. But then give examples of training that you've had, tied to, an organization, whether it be national, regional, but always know one or two issues that's on the that's on the forefront. And then the other question is, if you're so darn good, especially if you're a mid to senior level person, kind of on this call or across the board, and you're kind of positioning yourself as really, really, really good. You're a thought leader, but you know what? I really question thought leaders that aren't part of any organization. They've got to be part of something. I had a client in Maryland. This is when I was doing recruiting. I had extensive recruiting experience for those of you who know me. And that perfect candidate. And in the end, the CFO looked at her and said, well, what's the biggest issue? What's the biggest FASB issue out there? Right? And FASB is Financial Accounting Standard. And my candidate couldn't answer the question. I'll always remember that. And it was like deer in the headlight look. Well, why? Because she wasn't part of any type of national accounting organization out there. And there was a huge issue. Yeah, thank you. Federal Accounting Standards Board. There was a huge issue out there at the time that was going to have a major impact on how you define profitability, and it was being debated nationwide. And my client did not know it. And guess what? And the CFO called me up and said, "Let me tell you the singular reason she did not get picked." So this issue, tie yourself. This question's asked, and you're not part of anything. Just got to be careful. If you don't have an answer for this, I'd rather have you have an answer for this. And especially when they say, what's the biggest issue out there in your industry today? And you say, well, I'm not sure. That's not such a good answer, right? Got two more here. So if your boss was in a meeting, and this has come up over the years, and they simply said, hey, if your boss was in a meeting and he asked you for honest feedback of his or her really dumb idea, would you give it? See, it's kind of a trick question. They're asking you for your honest feedback at the meeting. Would you give it, right? Just make sure you have an answer for this. How would you answer it, right? And what they're doing is they're testing how tactful you are. You might want to critique it on a soft basis. And then maybe, privately, certainly critique it much harder. But that one has come up over the years with clients just to get a piece. I'm not sure, because they're asking for honest feedback, you should just sit there and kind of completely lie and say, oh, no, that's a great idea. I'm not sure it's a good answer, especially if it's a dumb idea. But there's ways to say it, and you have to be coached around how to go about saying it. Now, I'm going to close on this question. This question seems to be so simple at one level, but it's hard. What are your 3 greatest traits that make you you? And, we've talked about it a couple of different ways, but this is kind of a higher order. Person's looking at you and they're saying, what are the 3 greatest traits that really make you you? What are the pistons that kind of drive who you are? And everybody's got pistons, right, that drive who they are. And a lot of these pistons were not, these are pistons that somehow came about in the last 5 years in your last job. This is not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about are, what are the pistons that drive your engine in terms of who you are? And some of these pistons are probably who you were when you were in elementary school, middle school, high school. And it's part of who you are. And you just gotten better and better and better and better at it. And yes, some of work experience might mold in there, and one of those pistons could be driven off of work experience. But this question is, what are your 3 greatest traits? When this question is asked, I love it. But you can't ramble on. It's not long run-on sentence for each one. Get really tight to it, maybe a couple of words. But the reason I like it is because you have this opportunity again to say, here are the 3 greatest things you really need to know about me. And these 3 things in terms of who I am, it's the reason I've been so successful at accomplishing these things. It's not just how smart I am. That's a factor. See, if you're innovative, and chances are you were innovative not because of the last 4 years of your work life. You were innovative 25 years ago, 20 years ago, 15. I mean, you just continue to use that innovation to drive your accomplishments forward. It's a big part of your success and why you're successful. The only thing I recommend, if this question's asked and you give 3 traits, just make sure you're able to support it, each trait with 1 or 2 accomplishments underneath each one. Don't say that you're innovative. Have to support it with, let me tell you what happened 10 years ago when I was innovative. Because of this innovation in me, I went and I challenged something. And then not only challenged it, I ended up creating and helping drive this new thing, this new process, this new product, this new whatever, and look at what we ended up achieving. But if that part of never came out, it wasn't part of you, you probably wouldn't have even initiated it. So having some examples of what you've accomplished becomes pivotal in terms of answering this particular question. So I'm going to start to summarize here with, again, interview basics. All those things on that first slide, you should have those all nailed down. Behavioral competency base is a separate discussion all by itself. Interviewing well on Zoom all by itself. Panel interviews have its own pluses and minuses and all the things that go along with panel interviews. And then certainly practicing is everything.